After years of shooting portraits and looking back at photos like these that I wish I had done differently, here are 5 mistakes that ruin my portraits and how you can avoid them. And the first portrait mistake that I made for years was just constantly shooting wide open. But I've learned that shooting wide open at a really fast aperture does not make your portraits better, it's intention that does. And honestly, it is very tempting to shoot wide open because once you buy your first fast prime, say f1.8 or f1.4 or maybe even f1.2, you kind of feel like you should be using it wide open all of the time because that's probably why you bought the lens in the first place. And to be clear, there is absolutely nothing wrong with shooting wide open. I still do it all of the time. You know, you're going to get that great subject separation and beautiful background blur that we all love in portraits. The problem is shooting wide open by default, kind of on autopilot just because you can. Aperture is a creative decision, like everything else in photography, and it should be intentional. Take this photo, for example. So I shot this wide open on, I think, the RF 85mm 1.2, and I do still like the image, but I have to admit, every time I look at it now, I just think it would have looked so much better if I stepped the aperture down slightly, just to get both eyes properly in focus. Because when you start to zoom in and analyze the shot, it's actually pretty hard to tell what's even in focus with this photo. And that is not something that you want in a strong portrait. You want the viewer to know exactly what to focus on. The same goes for times when you're shooting at a stunning location. So maybe you've got beautiful mountains or gorgeous architecture and incredible light. And then you just go and blur it all into oblivion by shooting wide open at f1.4. Well then, what is the point of even being there? When you're at a location, a good habit is to ask yourself one question before you shoot. So what actually needs to be in focus in this frame? What is going to enhance the image? What is going to tell more of a story and give context to the location? Also remember, depth and separation in a portrait doesn't just come from aperture. You can use elements in the scene to frame your subject. You can increase the distance from your subject to add a bit of depth. You can include foreground elements and even things like leading lines. These all create depth in a portrait without relying on shooting wide open at all. And there are times, of course, where shooting wide open makes total sense, and we'll kind of get to that later. It all comes down to your vision for the shot and for the photo shoot. But for me, these days, my rule of thumb when it comes to aperture is pretty simple. For wider portraits, I'm pretty happy shooting wide open just for a little bit of extra separation. But when it comes to mid-length shots, I'm finding myself stepping down a little bit more. And for headshots especially, these days I'm usually always at f2.8 or even f4, just to get more in focus and get a kind of cleaner, more polished look. A super shallow depth of field does not equal professional. Control does. And the main takeaway, hopefully, from this point is just to be intentional. Ask yourself, what look am I going for here? What does the scene need? And then choose your aperture deliberately and not by default. And the second mistake is that your portraits might actually be too sharp. And just like shooting wide open all the time and chasing the blurriest background possible, it is really easy to fall into the kind of trap or habit of chasing razor sharp images as well. And don't get me wrong, sharpness does matter. You know, being able to capture clean detail is of course important, but it is also just as important to know when sharpness isn't right for the photo. And again, so before you even think about settings, ask yourself, what is the vibe of this shot? What is the creative vision? And if you're going for something dreamy and romantic or painterly, then a super clinical kind of hyper sharp look can actually work against you in my experience. Whereas yeah, sure, if you're shooting fashion or commercial work or even editorial work, then that sharpness might be exactly what you want. Take this shot, for example. So if this image was razor sharp in all areas of the frame, it just wouldn't work in my opinion. I was going for a painterly, kind of slightly otherworldly feel to this shot. And if I had kind of prioritized maximum sharpness, then the grass in the foreground would have been tack sharp and completely distracting in this image. But with it being blurred out here and skin detail being soft and Rachel's hair being soft, this all adds to the creative direction I was trying to achieve. Same with this image. So imagine in this shot, if every blade of grass was in focus, I think it would just lose all of its magic and look nowhere near as dreamy. Now, all this might kind of sound like it contradicts the first mistake, But again, it all comes back to being intentional. These are the moments where shooting at a fast aperture can totally enhance your creative vision. And if I'd have been stuck at, say, f4 here, then this shot would have lost something, in my opinion. More generally, what I'm trying to say is your gear and your settings should match the mood you're trying to create. Don't just set up an amazing location with beautiful light and neglect to think of these things. If you're going for a vintage or dreamy aesthetic, then a super sharp clinical look often just won't fit with the vibe. There are a few ways that you can control this, so yes, you can shoot wide open, but even then, these days a lot of prime lenses wide open are super sharp, so you could look into something like a diffusion filter, so like a black mist filter just to soften highlights and soften details. That's what I used in these photos, for example. But the main thing that you can always do is enhance the look in post. So with shots like this, I'm always applying selective sharpening. There is no point carefully creating separation through composition and depth of field, and then just kind of working against that by adding global sharpening to the entire image. Instead, these days, I always selectively sharpen just my subject and leave the foreground and background nice and soft and unaffected by the sharpening. And this might surprise a lot of you, but these days I am pretty much consistently always dialing down the clarity slider in Lightroom to a negative number, often as much as -10. And that's because modern lenses are incredibly sharp, sensors are super clean, and I think that a lot of these kind of modern primes especially are starting to lack a lot of character. And straight out of camera, everything can look just a little bit too perfect and too clinical. Reducing the clarity and only applying selective sharpening gives me a more natural, organic feel and less of that overly digital look. And when the image calls for it, I'll even often throw on some grain as well. And people ask me all the time how I get my portraits looking so soft and pleasing and kind of cinematic. And this is exactly how I achieve that. Again, it is not a rule, it's just a choice, but for more softer, kind of more atmospheric portraits with character, it often makes a huge difference. Before we get to the next mistake, guys, this video is sponsored by Squarespace. And as a photographer, I think having a site that showcases your work is an absolute must, and it just doesn't get any easier than Squarespace. There's no coding or design skills needed, it's pretty much just drag and drop. And now Squarespace even have amazing AI tools like Design Intelligence or Blueprint AI, all of which are just going to help you create a personalized website in just a few easy steps. And of course, the fully customizable photo galleries I think are just perfect for showing off your portfolio. Squarespace also has fantastic e-commerce tools that make setting up your own online store an absolute breeze, meaning you can start selling in no time and also handle many different types of payments seamlessly thanks to Squarespace payments. If you're ready to get started, head on over to squarespace.com/jamesreader and use code jamesreader for 10% off your first domain or website. The next mistake is bad framing. So specifically cutting the body at awkward places without realizing it. And I do this all of the time still today. Take this portrait, for example, and this one kills me because I really like this image, but you can probably see the issue straight away. So I've cut the hand off right at the wrist joint. And first of all, it's worth noting that hands can actually convey a surprising amount of emotion in a portrait, especially with a really good model. And often when they're missing, the portrait can feel strangely unfinished, even if you can't immediately explain why. Especially when there's a crop that includes most of the arm like this and then awkwardly chops off at the hand, it just looks like a mistake, and it was. I did the same thing in this image, but this time I just feel like I cropped too close to the ankle. And the human eye, it naturally follows the lines and flow of the body. So when you cut through joints, so wrists, elbows, knees, and ankles, it creates a visual stopping point that feels abrupt and uncomfortable to the viewer. And instead of focusing on expression or the location or eyes or mood, the viewer subconsciously notices this crop. When hands, arms, or feet are cut off in an image without intention, the image starts to feel like maybe you ran out of space, you just didn't notice what was in the frame, or you just didn't fully commit to the composition. So in that case, where should you crop? Well, the mid-forearm, for example, is much better than the wrist or the elbow, and the mid-thigh is a great place to crop instead of at the knee, and at the waist usually works great, or at the chest for tighter portraits. A simple rule for me at least is if it bends, then you probably shouldn't be cutting there. And another big thing with this is communication, so I always tell my model when I'm photographing them where I'm framing. So for example, if I'm cropping at the waist, I'll just say to them, this is a mid-length shot, I'm cropping at your waist. And often a great model will bring their arms into the frame and make them part of the pose. And of course, if I let a model know that it's a full-length shot, they'll often give me wider, more dramatic poses because they know that they have the space to play with. Portraits are always collaborative, and better communication almost always leads to better results. And when in doubt, just leave a little bit of breathing room, because you can always crop a little bit tighter and nail the correct crop later on in post. But of course, like in the shots I showed earlier, I can add back in what I didn't capture. Also, make the habit of scanning the edges of your frame before you shoot, because the edges of your frame are just as important as the center. Check all 4 sides. Are you cutting anything awkwardly, or is there anything distracting in the frame? So look at this shot. The basket handle is growing right out of my model's head, and that is totally my fault. I should have noticed this and I should have moved it. And now when I look at this image, again, it just hurts me a little bit, but it's just little details like this that pull focus from your subject. So these days, I really try and pay attention to the frame, all of it. The next mistake has nothing really at all to do with cameras or lenses. It's not thinking about everything else. And the truth is, I have learned that the difference between a good portrait and a great one usually has nothing to do with your gear. It's the outfit, it's the colors, the styling, the props, and really the planning. Don't be a photographer who just kind of turns up with a camera and just starts pointing and shooting. I find that the best portraits usually come from a bit of thought and planning before the shoot. So take this image, for example. So the location is pretty flat. It's basically just a desert. But Rachel's outfit is absolutely key to why this photo works. If she'd been wearing white or a lighter color, she just would not have stood out in this scene at all. And the black dress creates instant contrast. And as viewers, we're naturally drawn to that contrast, and we know exactly what we should be paying attention to in this image. And the material that she's holding onto also adds a lot. First of all, it gives her something natural to do with her hands. It shows that there's wind, and it adds movement to an otherwise very barren, still scene. And none of that was accidental. This was all discussed and planned before we even got on the plane and got to the location. Props and styling can completely transform a portrait photo shoot. So this image here was shot in a really simple, kind of boring park. Nothing very interesting about it, but Ali, the model, brought a blanket, food and drinks, and suddenly the scene just feels alive. It gives her something to interact with. It makes posing easier for her. It makes coming up with ideas on the fly way easier for me. And it also adds a sense of story to the image instead of just a girl standing in a field. Same with this photo. This was just taken in a back garden. And I just brought along a picnic blanket, and Elle, the model, brought along some props. And it just completely elevated the whole session. And I'd have never guessed that one of my favorite portraits of all time would have just been taken on grass in a backyard. Also, make sure to always think strategically about color and about styling. So start thinking about outfits in relation to your environment and the vibe that you're going for. So for example, if you're shooting somewhere that's going to be full of green foliage, so in a greenhouse or something, maybe suggest colors that complement green for your model's outfit. If you're shooting at golden hour in a really dreamy, beautiful location, then a flowy outfit that shows movement will probably work way better than just jeans and a t-shirt. And if you are ever unsure about styling, so hair, makeup, or outfits, well then maybe just have a chat with your model. So tell them the look you're going for and share some inspo pictures that maybe you found online and collaborate, because they'll often have really great ideas. And honestly, for me, I have learned more about styling from my wife and from models than anywhere else. Think of a portrait shoot like baking a cake, where you need the right ingredients to make something amazing. And your camera and the model are just 2 ingredients of a portrait shoot. You've got to think about makeup, hair, outfit, location, color palette, and props. Plan these elements so well that when you show up to the shoot, all you have to do is capture something awesome. The final mistake should probably have been first on the list, because honestly, without good light, nothing else really matters. You can have all those ingredients that we talked about right. You could have the perfect outfit, flawless composition, an incredible model, and a stunning location, but if the light is bad, then the image will just never reach its full potential. Now, don't get me wrong, we cannot control the light and we can't control the weather, and getting the shot in suboptimal lighting is always better than not getting the shot at all. But where possible, we should give ourselves the best chance of success and stack the odds in our favor by planning shoots around things like sunrise or sunset wherever possible, or even just nice weather. Warm directional light is incredibly flattering on skin tones, and it adds depth and contrast to images and even a sense of sharpness to a shot without even having to touch a single setting. If you're going for a really dreamy romantic vibe, then backlit golden hour light will only elevate that image in ways that harsh midday sun or flat overcast skies never could. And again, really what's important is that the light should match the vision. So for these shots, for example, moody flat lighting kind of works perfectly for these. That's what I wanted for these shots. But if these shots didn't have that golden directional pleasing light, then they would just feel flat. I know I've shown this comparison before in another video, but I really think it's worth showing again because these two images were taken in the exact same incredible location, same model, same outfit, but the one on the left was shot on a really dull overcast day and the one on the right was taken at golden hour. And yeah, I don't have to tell you that the one on the left just feels flat and kind of lifeless, and the one on the right with the nice light is punchy, vibrant. All of the colors look better, it looks more contrasty, it looks sharper, even though this is the exact same setup. It's just way more vibrant and kind of full of energy. And the only real difference between these images is the light. Don't get me wrong, I have still captured photos that I'm really proud of in harsh midday sun or on grey days. You know, you've got to work with what you've got. But when I do think about my absolute favorite images, the ones I'm genuinely proud to say that I was lucky enough to capture, well, they just were all shot in beautiful light. So yes, nail your styling, nail your concept, but give it the light that it deserves. So there we go. Those are a few portrait mistakes that I've made over the years, and hopefully now they're mistakes that you can avoid. But if you've got any tips when it comes to portraits, or maybe mistakes that you see all the time when shooting portraits, well, drop them in the comments below because I genuinely love to read what you guys think. But that's it. I really hope this video was helpful. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.